Hello, welcome to the Friday voice chats of the Men's Human Rights Discord. We are the official Discord of the Men's Rights subreddit. We do these talks every Friday, usually at around noon Eastern Time. Today we're doing 11 Eastern Time. So check in the days before. Today's topic, we're talking about how boys are very often over medicated and over drugged, and how this can cause lifelong effects. I have personal experience with this actually. I'm 28 years old, so I was in grade school around the late 90s and early 2000s. And back then, it was very fashionable to get Adderall and to be prescribed ADD, ADHD, and take Adderall, Vyvanse, Ritalin, all that kind of stuff. And I remember this started as early as second grade. I was 7 years old, and I would have my applesauce. You know, um, one of the faculty would come in, knock on the door, and say, "Oh, Thomas, applesauce time." And not just me, a whole bunch of us, and we would line up and we'd have our little spoonful of applesauce, which had a Ritalin pill inside of it. And that was the normal thing to do. Like, if you know, and when you went to high school, everybody was popping Adderall before tests. If you had an exam, if you had to stay up all night to do an essay, you just did some Adderall, and it was just completely normal. Nobody thought anything of it. And now we realize how bad this was. I still think I have problems with my short-term memory. I still have problems. I don't know if I would be diagnosed with dyslexia or not, but I do seem to have some issues when it comes to typos. I make little dyslexic mistakes. I have little short-term memory problems. It just feels like there's something not 100% right with my brain, and I wonder if it's because I was taking essentially legalized meth, obviously more mild, but still, since I was very young. And this mostly does happen to boys, and most people who were prescribed these pills were in fact boys. And I wonder how much this still happens today. It's not as bad as it was back then, but it probably does still happen. And a lot of it, there's debate about boys' nature and boys' behavior being a bit more rowdy, a bit more energetic in classrooms. And, well, let's fix that with a pill.
Thank you, Blue. Yeah, the stats that we've been given so far is that 20% of boys in primary school. I don't know what that is in America. 20% of boys in America are on Adderall and or some other drug, and it's like 40% by high school, secondary school time, and it's a very very powerful drug that is known to affect brain chemistry because that's what it's designed to do. And what we have been doing is basically telling our kids that drugs are bad, and then drugging our boys. And
Mostly
of course,
boys. Mostly
there
boys,
are
yeah.
yeah, mostly boys, almost entirely boys, from what I've heard. And I think by and large, it's got a lot more to do with how comfortable teachers are teaching boys versus the boys having some sort of condition, because there is no way that 40% of boys are disabled. I mean, that's what ADHD is. It's a disability. So why would 40% of boys be disabled unless something radically wrong is going on? And if nearly half are on this medication, then what is that turning nearly half of our adult male population into as they grow up? Because these pills, there is now talk about them causing apathy in like adults, like contributing to young adult men who fail to launch, who fail to thrive, who end up just wanting to play computer games and things like that. To
I
be
personally very much subscribe to that theory. I absolutely think that the heavy use of amphetamines in young boys, 15, 20 years ago, is one reason, not the only reason, one reason that young men are behind. I still think that there is systemic discrimination against men and boys in education and employment. So even if you took away the amphetamine issue, you would still see a gender gap. But I think a piece of the gender gap may very well be the overuse of amphetamines in young boys.
Yeah, we really don't know what these things are doing to their brains. We honestly don't. We know that it's changing the structure of their brains, but there is a level of quite intense apathy regarding boys, and just generally how they are. Anything to do with boys, really. We heard very recently again about the Irish exam board modifying marks for boys so that they never score higher than the girls on average. So they were basically removing a couple of points from all of the boys so that they always scored lower on average, like using an algorithm that's designed to mark the papers. So it's one of those things where once it's in place, there's really no way to say boys are doing worse than girls because it's just the system. It's like, how do you quantify which gender is doing worse if you're screwing with the results? It's just one of those things which makes it very, very difficult to see what kind of effect Adderall is having on exam results and what kind of effect that other drugs are having as well, and other practices, because basically we've decided that not only are we going to drug boys, not only are we going to screw about with how they naturally behave and treat them as defective girls, but we're also going to tamper with the results of that so that we can't ourselves detect the problem, in a meaningful way. Because if you're screwing with the results for an entire gender, then you have to throw the whole thing out because the results are tainted. I mean, it's the same thing with studies. If you find that during a study, the scientists or whoever involved took the data and added it all up and did it all correctly and took their preferred side and gave it extra marks, and then took away marks from their non-preferred side, and they would probably lose their jobs if they were found out. Unless, of course, they were in gender studies, in which case that's common practice, but that's another subject. And I'm pretty sure that what we have created now is basically the recipe for the fall of Western civilization, because we're destroying the next generation of boys, and we're culturing girls to hate boys, and we're teaching teachers to hate boys, and then the teachers are teaching boys to hate themselves, and then they're drugging the boys, and then everyone is angry at the boys because the boys aren't doing well, and they're wagging their fingers in the faces of the boys. And this isn't a recipe for boys succeeding. This is a recipe for boys opting out of the system, which we are seeing in great numbers. It's kind of heartbreaking, but nobody wants to talk about it.
Yeah. And really, those of us who do want to talk about it, it's very difficult for us to, kind of come to grips with the idea that at the end of the day, really, this is by design and it is working effectively. I mean, for example, I can generally tell when I'm interacting with a younger person, especially a younger man, that they were very likely doped as children, because their behavior is frankly a little bit different, and a little heartbreaking to watch sometimes. But when I step back and look at it in general and in the context, Ma, of what you were just describing about how the research books are being cooked using this, using medication using dope. And I say, well, what did we expect was going to happen? You know, it's, I believe it is working as designed. You know, you mentioned that it's destabilizing, you know, Western civilization in general. And to that I respond, you know, they've been at it since I was a kid. So yeah, they are making progress. You know, it is working.
Well, they basically want to fit everything into one mold, and they've molded it, and because of all the political propaganda they've heard, is that they need to make it work well for girls, and then anything that isn't girls is going to be a deviation, and they're going to force that deviation to work within their mold, and if it doesn't, then they're willing to drug boys to refit them so that they can be well, proper,
I mean, it seems like
which is
the big and bad they, quote unquote, it's like they
well, I mean, not
almost-
necessarily people with intentions, but just systems. If you create a rule or law in a certain way, and people are just are not thinking critically, or not trying to criticize that system, then you're going to get this kind of thing where people would rather just force the current outcome rather than looking at it and say, oh, the system is broken, we need to change things. I'm sorry for trying to create I didn't want to create a amalgamous monster thing. Sorry.
it seems like these systems almost take pleasure in excluding men. Like Joe Biden's restaurant. I know this isn't exactly on topic, but it's related. Like Joe Biden's restaurant relief bill being written to explicitly exclude white male restaurant owners, and all these different bills and all these different programs and all these different systems that seem to go out of their way just to exclude boys. And try to bring men and boys in the conversation is something that feminists drag their feet to. And it's just, well, what's the point? How do you benefit girls by excluding boys? What are you doing? Okay, so I'm seeing an article now. ADHD medication Ritalin in boys' brains. I'm seeing Darkisha just posted
Cool.
that. Yeah, so I'm one of those boys. I was around 7, 8, 9 years old, and I took Ritalin on a daily basis. And it's just, you can't blame parents for listening to doctors, right? I mean, a psychiatrist is a professionally trained medical professional, so you're supposed to be able to trust them, right? And I wonder how many of those psychiatrists are even to blame. Maybe if they were educated that, hey, this is a good idea, maybe they trust their professors, their professionals. So, but yeah.
Yeah. To me, it just seems like the outcome of what all the feminist propaganda has been about, like, oh, women have been, was it? Have been disenfranchised, and we've always been treated worse and that kind of stuff. Well, then you're going to create systems that are going to try to put women in a more favorable position, where it's going to disenfranchise boys and men. And this is the outcome.
I would say, at least for the time being, I mean, it's two different branches of manipulation. Toward men and boys, it's geared toward discouragement and curtailment, and toward girls and women, it's toward encouragement and empowerment. But as somebody pointed out earlier, it's still for the purpose of fitting a particular mold. I mean, let's not delude ourselves that the people that have been driving all of this, let's not kid ourselves that they care any more about women and girls than they do about men and boys, because the women and girls that I hear from feel just as jerked around as we do, just in a different way. Right? So the ones that kind of come to grips with the fact that they're being played, they're every bit as resentful as we are. So, like I said in the chat, there is an impetus behind all of this, and frankly, it has nothing to do with making things all good for women and making nothing good for men. Okay? It's for conditioning men and women to be willing and even eager to accept less for themselves and each other, and to keep each of us at each other's throats, which is, frankly, like I said, it's working like a charm. So why should they stop?
Most people, right? When they don't have ADHD. I don't know what any of that type of medication is like because I haven't taken it. Anybody can chime in on that.
So the Ritalin, I don't really remember, to be honest, what it felt like. I mean, I was 7 years old, 8 years old, 9 years old or so. I just remember taking it. So I really, it's difficult to remember what it was like then. Adderall, I remember, is a straight up drug. I mean, this is something that I was prescribed for school, but it's something that, I played football and we would take it before games to give us a boost. I mean, it was something that got you high. I mean, it's Adderall is drugs. It's amphetamines. It's not quite methamphetamine, but it's pretty close. I've never done meth, so I don't know what meth feels like, but I've talked to people that have done both, and they say it's not that different. So you're giving 13, 14, 15-year-olds something that is not all that different from meth, and you're telling them to take it every day. And I had at my vitamin store, I had a customer come in a couple weeks ago. He was a 19-year-old college student, and he says he's addicted to Adderall, but he ran out, and he has a test in an hour, or he has class in an hour, whatever it was. Do you have anything you could recommend to, like, give me that boost, like, do you have some kind of energy pill? It's just that is such a normal thing. It's even worse in college than in high school. But Adderall, what does it feel like? It feels like being high. I mean, I will say, a little birdie told me it's stronger than cocaine. It is stronger than cocaine, like much stronger than cocaine. And the hangover from when you quote unquote roll on Adderall because you have an essay you were supposed to do, and it's 11 p.m. and you have to finish it by tomorrow morning, so you take an Adderall every hour or so to stay up and do it. The effect the next day, I mean, is awful. I mean, severe paranoia, severe headaches, hallucinations, delusions. You're shaking. I mean, it is drugs. It is a very serious drug, and it's handed out to teenage boys and even pre-teenage boys, and even like 13. I got prescribed when I was 14. They hand it out like candy, and it's probably not the same as it was back in the 2000s, but back then it was the fashionable thing to do. It's like people would intentionally go to psychiatrists and try and get diagnosed with ADHD because you want those magic pills. And apparently at Harvard, MIT, all those kinds of universities, everyone does it. And it's just such a normal thing to do. And I can't imagine that it hasn't caused serious problems in millions of young men. And it does happen, and to women. I'm not saying it only happens to boys, but it does happen to boys significantly more often. And in my age group, it starts young. And Ritalin is not quite Adderall, but it's still in that same amphetamine class. And so I have to believe that, yeah, it does cause brain damage. And I have to believe that we are, in fact, poisoning or used to poison children, And I think, yeah, it's definitely had a long-term effect.
Yeah, it's worth watching the Netflix documentary Take Your Pills, I think it's called. And they basically go through all of this and how like regular amphetamines used to be treated the same way, and now Adderall is basically just a rebrand of this PEP pill that people used to rave about, to work and learn and stuff like that. It's the same stuff, really. And yeah, we are giving it to little kids, and there's some weird side effects. There's also a I can't remember his name, something Lewis documentary about where he goes around to various different Louis Theroux, sorry, documentary where he goes around to various kids who are on drugs, and he focuses on this little boy who's basically they don't know how long it's going to be before he kills himself. He's on all these pills. He's making basically the 9-year-old equivalent of suicidal gestures. It's kind of scary. And at the same time, they just, like, the parents insist that he needs this medication to get by, and it's.
I mean, I know people who have weaned off Adderall using cocaine. It was the step down. And this is when they were teenagers. So, I mean, to put it in perspective, it's like that.
That's scary. I mean, all this stuff in school. So, I mean, you all remember it. Cocaine is the big scary drug, and heroin and stuff like that. But don't worry, just take that little pill that's worse, and you'll be great.
Darkisha study just gave an article from Esquire. 1 in 7 American boys will be diagnosed with ADHD before they're 18. That's just unbelievable.
Personally, I really don't know much about like ADHD medication and stuff like that, since like in India, mental health is not is probably ignored by a large extent, especially when it happens to men. Mental health is kind of a joke around here. If people found out that you go to a therapist for any kind of stuff, maybe to outgrow some kind of trauma, mental stress, or depression, they would call you a mental person or a retard, to be honest. So I am actually quite scared that even in like countries where mental health is talked about, so like such problem exists where like young boys or young men are getting addicted to such kind of drugs or medication, and I have never heard about it, like never. And like I'm really active on internet, but I have never heard about it. This is my first time hearing about it, and I think it's like better to have like some medical someone from some doctor or someone in medical profession um to be in this kind of chat, because otherwise it may make us seem like some conspiracy theorist.
Yeah, that is a thing that you have to be wary of. The establishment and the media and that. If you look at that BBC article about the MP was talking in Parliament about how boys are being pushed to the side and how they don't have any role models and anything like that, and then the media and that come along and they try and reframe that as him saying that Doctor Who being a woman now causes crime. That's not actually what he was saying. What he was actually saying was boys having no role models except for like the Krays and like other criminal men in TV shows and like the bad guys is causing like a generation of boys who idolize those men because they're the only thing that they have to latch onto.
It's really scary that I never heard about like this problem that people are like getting especially young boys are getting addicted at such a young age to such medication. I knew that like getting addicted to a medication was a problem, but not to this extent. I have never seen such serious problem being talked about. I mean, it's honestly scary, really scary. I mean, I'm just like, I mean, it hits hard to me. I've actually lost quite a few male family members to different kind of addiction. Let it be drug addiction, let it be alcoholism, let it be cigarettes, let it be other stuff. I have really lost many of my close male relatives to addictions, and I have never seen this being talked about. Like, I'm honestly quite troubled by this.
Can I say something? Can you hear me?
Go on, Kath.
If you'd like me to get my husband to see if he'll speak on any of this, he's a doctor and he's actually prescribed Adderall. But
Oh, please do.
Please,
almost
yes.
every doctor, almost everyone in medical school is prescribed Adderall, honestly. But I'll
Yep.
see if he'll speak. He may not want to talk on this platform, and it's also, like tied to his license. But I'm in the car, but when I get home, I'll ask if he'll speak about it. He's not currently taking Adderall, but he is prescribed it.
Yeah.
So wait, you're saying that almost every medical professional is prescribed this drug to
Almost
themselves?
everyone in medical school is prescribed it. If you go to the doctor, I was prescribed it when I was in my first year of medical school. If you go to the doctor, I mean, they pretty much just give it to you.
And pretty much everybody at
Which
MIT,
country are you from?
everybody she's in the U.S.
They're just
Okay.
like, I mean, they kind of push it on you because I didn't want to be on any stimulants. I don't sleep. Yes. Thank you. Sorry, I was in a drive-through. But I mean, I wouldn't take it, but I was briefly prescribed it. I took like 3 of them and I hated it. I didn't sleep for like 3 nights.
I mean, let's be honest though. For that 6 hours, it is magic.
Well, yeah. And so if you have to study 15 hours a day, it allows you to do that.
I mean, it's like you look at a calculus equation. It's like you just see the lights in your head. You just like it solves itself. I mean, it's just it's like you have to write an essay and you're completely stuck. You take an Adderall and you just half an hour later, 2 pages are just done, just like that.
That's
I know
that's a
one of-
problem looking for a solution. That's
I
literally
know.
like, oh, we're gonna force people to study 15 hours a day or they're not gonna make their classes, and then there's gonna be like, oh well, we'll push stimulants onto them so that they can make those study hours instead of trying to make them study normally and maybe likely be more
Guys.
intelligent and more.
I'll see if
better.
he'll speak on it. I will say he might be a little more complimentary than you're looking for on it, because if it's taken in a monitored way and you're not like because a lot of people will take too much or they won't dose it right, so the night they have to study they'll take like 3 of them. But and I know that so there's
Or 4 or 5
Ritalin
or
and
6 or
Adderall.
7.
One's like cocaine and one's like meth in its structure.
Yeah.
Guys, if you give me about a week's time, I really do know someone like that's currently in college and learning to be a psychiatrist. So I can get her in next week if you guys want me to.
Please do if you can.
I will
I'm
try.
gonna-
If you give me week's time, I could get her. I mean, she is learning to be a psychiatrist, so maybe she knows about this topic more, and she could like give us some professional advice too.
Yeah, I'll
Yeah.
hang up, I'll mute myself and I'll go ask him. He may not be willing to speak just because, like he has a license and this is a contentious platform, but then also just, I mean, he can't telling you what something is, he can't really say that he's diagnosing anyone or saying anyone shouldn't or should be on medication.
Yeah, make sure he's comfortable saying whatever he's saying.
Yeah. So, but I'll go ask him.
We're happy for him to just say a block of whatever he wants to say and then quit, and we'll just debate about what he said.
Yeah, and I think also he'll probably have to say it like not officially as a physician, just because.
Okay.
Let me also say something not officially as in fact, let me say something that's not even true at all. But it's probably false that in South Florida, where high school football is extremely competitive, coaches definitely do not hand out Percocets and Adderall before the game and at halftime.
That my figure skating instructors before we did synchronized skating would give us ephedrine.
Pretty much every NFL, it's kind of like no one's going to admit this, but everybody knows. NFL players are almost never sober during games. They're almost always on something. Like it's a known thing.
It's probably because they've been like that all their life, and they've been given these pills when they were kids, and so it just became normal. And so when the coach, goes around handing them out, they don't really question it. And like, you want to win.
Well, you have to, because if
proud.
if you don't, your opponent is. So it's like if you don't take the boost pill, your opponent did. And the other thing is, almost all Premier League, NBA, NFL, all the top tier athletes, all Olympians, they're all on steroids. And modern day steroids are not like the steroids of the 80s. Like the perceptions we have of steroids from the 80s, what makes your testicles shrink, it makes you go crazy. The new technology of steroids is very different. And nowadays, at the top level, you have to take steroids just to keep up. So they don't take steroids to get an advantage; they take it to not fall behind. Like, yeah, but look at guys like Ronaldo and Messi and Tom Brady are setting records past the age of 35. Not doing that on chicken breast and kale.
The level of drugging in America and in the West generally is pretty damn high. I mean, this is a worldwide thing, but there's a difference between people doing it off the books and then kids being lined up for their daily spoon of applesauce with a pill in it, and that pill is something that's going to damage their minds, but it will make them compliant in the class, and they'll probably be able to memorize a few things for a little while and spit them out for the test, and then they'll forget all about it because pills. It's very hard to really say what they're going to retain and what they're going to remember, and if they're going to still be functional adults at the end of it. I mean, you could be the best student in the world on Ritalin or whatever this drug is that you're being given, but growing up on that chemical compound is probably going to alter you for the rest of your life. I mean, if you look at any tobacco smoker, even the addiction, it creates a lot of receptors in your brain for the drugs that are in the nicotine in the tobacco, and it's you end up needing, feeling like you need this hit of this drug because it's become part of your chemical makeup, and it's an expected part of your body. So if you don't have it, then suddenly your body goes into panic mode, and that's really what withdrawal is. As far as I'm aware, you don't have this chemical which has become a normal part of your processing, and suddenly you feel very strange indeed. Oh, Kathleen's saying that her husband will, or partner will, actually give us a little talk on the live stream. We will stay silent during the the whole of his speech if he wants us to, and if he doesn't want to do a Q&A at the end, we are happy to leave that off, but we will just talk about what he said.
Okay. He wants a second to kind of make an outline, I guess, of what he's going to say. And he may be willing to answer questions, but this is in an unofficial capacity.
I mean, I know we're mainly talking about medication in general, and we went into ADHD. I think in our medication as well. Ma, sorry to call you old, but ADHD is still prescribed and still a problem that a lot of people, a lot of boys specifically, are getting drugged by it. I think another thing to look at too is the new ADHD, if you want to call it that way, which is like antidepressants. Everyone nowadays is like prescribed with depression so easily. Like they're handing out antidepressants like it's candy. I remember in my class, if you weren't smoking marijuana, you were on antidepressants. It was only one of two options.
Yeah, I was.
Marijuana
They
is
tried to.
really mild.
I was told that I ought to be on antidepressants. I was actually depressed for a long time, but I was told that I should be on them, and I didn't want to have this sort of be attached to this chemical that I could never get rid of, even if it made me feel better in the short term. I didn't want to end up being reliant on it and stuff like that. I mean, I have heard now that antidepressants are something you can wean yourself off of, but the question is, when do you do that and stuff like that? And honestly, I feel like, and actually the UK is actually heading this way, that before you get antidepressants, you should be in therapy and you should try that. But that does seem to be the direction that the UK is going now, in that they're trying to get people to have therapy before they just try and fix the problem with a pill. Obviously, there are some people, quite a few people, who are so depressed that they do need some sort of pill to help. But Grimaldi, your mic's live. They do need some sort of pill to help them because it's just so severe and therapy just won't do it. But, you know, I think it shouldn't be the first thing you go to unless it's just a really desperate case. Grimaldi, did you want to say something? I guess not. Please do keep your mics. Oh, sorry.
This might be a good one. I was already a member, but can you hear me? I mean,
Not really. We're getting bits of words. We can hear you now.
I'm sorry. Is that better?
Yeah.
Sorry, I just had to move the microphone closer, I guess.
Okay, carry on.
It's just funny you were talking about depression because I'm really fucked up today because my wife is so depressed constantly about everything. She has really horrible chronic depression, and some days all she does is sit around and cry, and it's really a downer. I'm not mad at her. I mean, I love her, but God, some days I just wish I could just have a little peace and quiet from the constant weeping. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be all dramatic there.
Hey man, I can relate. Don't worry. You don't have to be sorry. There's people. I mean, I don't know if other people could, say, it's kind of private, but I'm married, and you know, I deal with a depressed wife also. So you're not the only one, man. Don't worry about it.
She gets like 2 different kinds of talk therapy. She gets ketamine therapy. She gets TMS. She gets like every kind of therapy there is, and I don't know what else to do. And her dog just
It's
died.
a hard one.
Extra bad, and it's Thanksgiving, so yeah, it's pretty bad. But I don't know. I think
It's really hard to say.
Whenever I argue with my woman, I find what I've been finding with her is she has a lot of unrealistic expectations, and it leads to me and her fighting, kind of arguing, but her unrealistic expectations to me is what I found is her cause of her depression. And I have to remind her of that sometimes, even though I remind her, she constantly forgets about it. We're not rich, and I'm not like a prince, like a king, she's just, I don't know, she's just expecting me to be somebody that I'm not. And I'm like, this is who it is. This is how things are. You're going to have to accept it. or we're gonna have to move on.
Chasing after dreams can make you depressed simply because you can't ever attain them. But what I found when I was extremely depressed was that going for walks in the sunshine was a major thing that lifted my mood. Having a
If we could pause this, Benjamin has something to do in a second. So if we could talk, if he wants to talk, if we could go ahead and let him talk, he's getting kind of antsy.
Sure. If everyone could mute their mics and please not talk while he's talking, that would be good.
So what questions was it that
I
you
think
were
just
asking?
give an overview on stimulant-based medications, and we're talking about how readily they're prescribed to young males and people, also older people that are like at high-pressure colleges or PhD programs, medical school, things like that.
Sure. So
and this is Benjamin. This is my husband.
I can give some factual based information about the mechanism of action of the stimulant-based therapies, and I can give you my own experiences with them, and also just a sort of unofficial medical opinion about their use and the ramifications of their use, their widespread use. So Adderall is amphetamine salts, and the mechanism of action of those is that it both stimulates the release and blocks the reuptake of norepinephrine, serotonin, and dopamine in the synaptic cleft in neurons. And Ritalin is similar in mechanism of action. It doesn't stimulate the release, but it does block the reuptake of dopamine and norepinephrine. It's not serotonergically active. Well, they do a whole lot of different things depending on what part of the brain they're in. But in the frontostriatal pathways, they are involved in attention, and attention is really it's less of a positive phenomenon than it is a negative phenomenon. And by that I mean you don't pay attention to things, you tune out everything but the thing that you're trying to pay attention to. So the action is actually ignoring stimuli. That's what attention is. It's not something that you do to one thing, it's something that you do to everything but that thing, right? And your ability to do that is dependent on mostly norepinephrine and dopamine in the frontostriatal pathway. And it's a fatigable process. And everyone reaches a point where they are unable to tune out external stimuli, and they get overwhelmed. They get sensory overload. And for people with ADHD, especially the inattentive type of ADHD, that happens much more quickly because of a relative deficit of norepinephrine and dopamine in the frontostriatal pathway. I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was in medical school and was started on Adderall. And looking back, I would say that the signs that I had it my whole life were there, but I was able to adapt until I was put in a high enough pressure situation that my adaptations were not adequate. And I remember taking the medication for the first time and going, is this what like normal people experience all the time? This feels like a superpower, the ability to not lose track of a conversation that I'm having, or, not run red lights. And I remember describing it to other people as like old computers having multiple applications running at the same time. Like they would all kind of slow down. If you just closed all the extraneous programs, then everything would run faster. Or like listening to 6 different radios all tuned to different stations, and then the medication just kind of turns the volume down on all of the radios so that it's not so distracting. So, throughout my medical training, I was on Adderall. I don't take it anymore, but mostly because I have such bad ADHD that I forget to get it refilled. My perspective on how I think it is used and how it affects the general population. I mean, I certainly have mixed feelings about it, because on the one hand, my experience with it was very positive. There wasn't a whole lot of drawback for me, in the sense that like it didn't give me insomnia, and it didn't completely kill my hunger drive or anything. It just kind of made me able to function. But I also wasn't taking it when I was, a young child and developing. I do think that there is definitely room to expand non-pharmaceutical therapies in the younger population, like to pay more attention to that than we do sometimes. But I also think there are a lot of kids that probably would benefit from getting tested for it that don't at an early age. Because I do think that the way that people with ADHD learn is a lot different and requires a different approach, not necessarily a pharmaceutical approach, but just a different teaching approach. Having had to develop adaptive strategies in my own life, I know that it's possible to do that. Making lists and carrying around lists is a good adaptation that I found helped me. Another thing is putting my things in the same spot every time so that I didn't lose them. Little things like that. Taking very frequent breaks and doing things in very short bursts is another adaptive strategy, and those can be taught to children. But I also think that the way that our education system generally works, at least in the United States, where you have a bunch of kids sitting at desks listening to a teacher talk at them for 8 hours a day or however long, is pretty maladaptive to the way that most children learn and most children's brain function. I think that that kind of passive learning where they have to sit still, the human brain is just, even an adult human brain is not geared that way. Like after about an hour to an hour and a half, even a normal person's attention span is significantly depleted, and their ability to absorb information decreases. I don't even know that this impulse is limited to young boys, although I think boys have a tendency to like the incidence of ADHD is higher in men, certainly. I think it's higher because in women it ends up manifesting as like either obsessive compulsive tendencies or as tic disorders. And in men, those are coded on the same gene and inheritable, certainly. Yeah, I think that the way that our education system works is maladaptive to the way that young brains actually learn and function. I think a more interactive and more active in general approach to learning with, more frequent breaks and shorter bursts of teaching is probably a better method. And you could probably do away with a lot of the need for medications if you change the way that our education system worked. That's sort of my perspective. Did that answer the question that I was supposed to be answering? Was that helpful at all?
Do you think it overprescribed to young boys as a mechanism to shut them up in class or to have them sit still longer? Or children in general, girls as well?
I think I have to trust that doctors who are the neurologists that are evaluating children for ADHD and the psychiatrists that are evaluating children for ADHD and put children on medication are doing so in good faith, in the sense that they think their disease process is bad enough that they need medication. Do I think sometimes it gets prescribed to kids that don't need it? I mean, I'm sure that happens occasionally, in the same way that I'm sure lots of other like medications, antidepressants, even antibiotics get prescribed when they're really unnecessary. But I like to think that in general, neurologists and like child neurologists and child psychiatrists are acting in good faith when they're prescribing medication, in that they think that that's the most efficient way to fix the problem. But I think that a systemic change is possible in teaching adaptive strategies and in reforming the way that young children are educated, that might make that irrelevant.
Do you think that being on a stimulant medication as a young child can affect your brain in the long term, or affect your ability to adapt to the world if you were taken off it as an older person?
I think if the medication is all they ever have, and it's not augmented by teaching adaptive strategies and cognitive therapy alongside the medication, that yes, if they get to the point where they're an adult, I mean, the disease process remains, really. If they're suddenly taken off medication, they're going to be poorly adapted because they're not going to have been taught how to deal with not being on the medication. That's all they're ever going to know. Do I think the medication can still be helpful? Yes. But do I think that it needs to be augmented with non-pharmaceutical strategies? Yes, I do.
Do you think it causes any like long-term damage?
I don't think it causes any damage, other than I think that it's if they completely rely on that and it's taken away from them, that can be detrimental because they have never had the opportunity to learn adaptive strategies.
Not like rebound depression or anything like that when you've been taken off it.
No, I don't. I don't think it would cause rebound depression because it's not an antidepressant.
But I mean, hang on, just really fast. So you really don't think that giving a 7-year-old or an 8-year-old Ritalin every single day? I mean, we had a study posted in the text chat showing changes to brain matter. You really don't think there's any possibility, even high probability, of causing permanent brain damage giving Ritalin to a 7-year-old on a daily basis?
Brain damage? No. I mean, so I'm a neurologist by trade. Permanent changes to white matter tracks is not always necessarily a bad thing. Those could be positive changes to the white matter system. It could be a positively reinforced connectivity in the frontostriatal cortex.
I mean, but how can giving a child essentially an amphetamine class drug that causes changes to their brain matter, how can that possibly be good? What good could come from that?
Well, like I said, if it's reinforcing noradrenergic pathways and dopaminergic pathways in the frontostriatal cortex, it might actually promote the development of the attention system in a positive way. That would be a permanent change that could be beneficial.
Thank you. We'll possibly do a sort of Q&A in the text chat where people give us their questions and then you can relay them, and we'll possibly do a follow-up later where we talk about his answers. I think if people would like to question what he's saying, give their own perspective and so on.
I actually might be heading out right now. So I have work at 3 and I want to get that video done. So, but Kathleen, thank your husband for stopping by and for that information. We do appreciate it.
Absolutely.
And this is actually turning out to be a much more entertaining chat than I was expecting. So.
Okay, thank you, Blue, and thank you, Kathleen, and your partner, I think it is. But I'm not sure that how I feel about the could have positive changes, because I've seen a lot of stuff about people being very unsure about whether or not it has any kind of positive impact in terms of like the long-term sort of stuff. But
hey guys, just real quick, since we're talking about Adderall, I just wanted to give my quick personal experience. I found that it was really easy to get prescribed Adderall, like shockingly easily. I'm not talking, this is just me, and I don't know about children, but it was really easy. I haven't sought out any kind of medication like this before. This was my first time seeking out this kind of medication through the medical world, asking a medical professional to give me some medication, and I found it was pretty easy to get. And I don't know, I really love Adderall personally, but I only take a small dose each day, like a 10 milligram. I know people who are taking like 20 and 30 milligrams each day. So, and the 10 milligrams has, like, I don't know, I'm able to do a lot more with my life, like focusing on just completing tasks. Then I've noticed that I'm able to do that a lot better than what I did in the past. And like, it hasn't really affected my, I haven't seen very many negative effects, but I've only been concerned recently about liver damage. So that's, other than that, I don't see any negatives to it. But yeah, definitely children. That's definitely questionable.
I do think that regardless of how much of a positive effect it might have in like an adult or similar, we should be asking some deep questions about why something like 40% of kids by high school are on it. I think there might be 40% of boys, not kids, but we should definitely be asking why 20% of boys are on it during their primary school years. It does seem an awful lot like, from what Blue was saying, that they will just pick the boys who seem to be acting out in class, who seem to be full of energy, who seem to be like loud and bouncing about in their seats and getting hyperactive. And they'll talk to the parents about getting them an ADHD diagnosis, take them to the doctor, and then it's from there. It seems to be very easy to get a diagnosis. But yeah, we should also mention other diagnoses that it's possible to get as a secondary schooler. It's very easy to get like like a depression diagnosis from what I've seen, and I do think that we should ask questions about these medications and how many are being prescribed, if group therapy wouldn't be better, and if we're not prescribing them, for example, for things that are like also adjacent to real conditions. Because I mean, there's no doubting that ADHD is a real condition, but is it being over prescribed for kids? I think that is a major thing we should ask. But moving on from medication, we should also talk about the way that boys, as we've seen before, have been marked down in their work, just automatically because they're boys. We do have several studies suggesting that boys, if you get rid of the gender on all the gender markers on a test paper and you pile them up and you just give them to a random teacher to mark, they will, without knowing which papers are by boys and which are by girls, they will mark them a lot more equally, and the boys will score a lot higher than if you give the same teacher papers with the names on them so they can tell which is by a boy and which is by a girl. That's been studied quite a bit, though it does need to be studied a lot more.
I mean, this isn't my own experience, but I do have a younger sibling who's a male. And the school he currently goes to, they like doing like awards and like at the end of the year giving like certificates and doing competitions for the best, and the teacher obviously always grades. And for me, what's always surprising is they always do their little competitions, their little awards of who's doing great in class, and all the winners are always female in their classes for getting these like little certificates of, oh, you're doing so great in class and you got the highest scores and stuff. And yet I've seen some of the guys in my siblings' class work their butts off and get amazing grades, but the winners are always only the female. And
That's
so
very interesting.
Yeah.
Has anyone confronted them about this or confronted the school about it?
None of the parents did. I did try to ask a teacher about it one time, and all they said is the guys just need to work harder.
Yeah, it does sound an awful lot like one of those sort of excuses that is so very plausible when you don't know what the actual situation is in the class. It's the kind of thing they give to parents all the time, I should imagine.
I'm not a parent, I can't speak to this, but just looking at like the parents who go to my siblings' school, like parents in general, I think the issue is they don't see an issue with it at all. They aren't questioning it. They think it's just normal at this point.
I've definitely had the experience of being promoted as a female in the sciences. I don't necessarily think that the boys were being marked off, but I know that like I've been selected for talks and things like that, especially at schools. like talking about science, talking about going into science, when a lot of my male friends' research has been a lot more digestible to children or even better done. But I have been selected as an example of a woman in science to go speak.
Yeah, we have had some people on before saying that they were giving out awards in their school, and even though they got the top mark, all the awards were given to girls. And then they were asked to give the keynote speech, which I think was a bad move on their part because he could have easily sabotaged it by working that into the speech. It was, I think it was some sort of speech writing competition specifically that he was talking about with that one. But yeah, it does seem to be like holding boys back as a method of pushing girls ahead is extremely dangerous, but it also seems to be extremely prevalent from what we've seen with our research. And it's kind of shocking how often we just come across people who've had it done to them. You know, it's just generally, it seems to be something that you can run across on general Reddit and general social media. People just talking about this. There's been some Ask Reddit threads about it. It's pretty shocking. Nikki's just posted a Science Direct link. Without teachers' bias in favor of girls, the gender gap in choosing a science track would be 12.5% larger in favor of boys. That's an interesting way of phrasing that, I think.
Yeah, that's a lot like the kind of, scare tactic of saying that in America, 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 women are homeless, which is a weird way of saying 3 out of 4 men are homeless. But I mean, it all kind of depends on, which part of a person's thinking you're trying to influence. Kathleen, what you were saying about coming to the realization that, you were promoted, that you were singled out, as a woman. I say of the women that I've talked to that kind of begin to see that for what it is, they don't, that doesn't give them any sense of security, and it doesn't give them any sense that, things are going their way. And I was wondering when you looked at that and said, this is at least in some measure because I'm a woman. I mean, did that make you feel better, worse, no different?
Well, I think about it a couple different ways. I also think it's because I'm objectively a beautiful woman. So part of me says I'm going to use it to the best of my advantage. But I also think there's a lot of things I could win regardless of being female. So I think in some ways, like I didn't write my research to go show middle school students. But it is insulting that I think that that's sometimes why I'm able to win. I've won because of that. I think I can win, against the boys without any advantage. So I think it's insulting in that way. But I also think, I realize I'm not going to throw away a chance that I've been given because I'm a beautiful woman. But I think if I can use it to my advantage and they think I can't win and I win anyway, I'm going to use it. So I'm not going to, refuse to take something. But I think everyone's been given skills and everyone's been given gifts. And if that gives you an advantage, you need to use it. It's just like being given a beautiful singing voice. And if you can, be at the top of your field or make a difference of some sort, then I'm going to do it. I'm a falconer, and I've been in magazines and things like that because they want my picture in it with the birds, even though there's people that have been falconers much longer than me. And I'm not going to turn that away because, eventually I want to be the best falconer in the United States, and that's going to help me get there. And if, being a beautiful blonde woman helps get me there, I'm not going to say no to that.
Getting into the mode of thinking that it's another tool is a bad idea because you end up relying on it much in the same way as like an addict relies on a drug. And it becomes built into the way you do things, and it becomes built into the system, and you start to expect it. And then, if somebody tries to take that away from you, you're going to fight back against it in a lot of cases. I mean, not everyone will fight back against it, but a lot of people will. But it's so patronizing being given an advantage specifically because you're in a set group of people. It's like being in the nobility, and being in the nobility gives you a 2-minute start on every race. So by the time that anyone else is allowed to participate in the race, you've already won. I feel that's damaging to the side that doesn't get that advantage, and it's also giving the side that does get the advantage an extreme sort of feeling of deserving the advantage, and at the same time,
Well, we need to
it's
add to
patronizing.
this a bit of context as well, in that men have, well, we've had more access to certain things, but we've also been told that it was our responsibility to treat it well. So we've continuously being told that this is our responsibility, and you need to be fair with it. You need to make sure that you carry a burden on your shoulders, and this is your responsibility. But now we're trying to push women forward, or society's trying to push women forward, and they're not saying this is your responsibility now. You hold the keys to society. Now it's just like, oh, men have historically oppressed you. Go have at it. Just have fun. And that's the most dangerous thing, I would think, about this
I would
currently.
disagree with that to a bit. Pardon.
Yeah, of course,
I
there have been
interrupt.
people that have abused their power. Definitely.
Yeah, I think it has
But
more
it's
to do with
most of
how
the
people
times it
have.
was people that weren't taught
One at a time,
responsibility
guys.
well enough. Yeah, sorry.
I do think that, honestly, it's, I think it's a dangerous game to play, this whole equity thing. It's the idea that, they've been pushing this idea that men have had special advantages, and us saying that we've also had special responsibilities isn't the whole story, because when you look at it historically, actually men and women had different responsibilities and different benefits, and we've always had these kinds of benefits, and they're kind of invisible. And saying that men have had special advantages over women is kind of not telling the whole story, especially when a lot of this historical stuff is pretty much mythical in a lot of places. Like the idea that women couldn't go to university has been debunked. There were female doctors in like the 1800s and things like that. And there were women working in factories. There are all kinds of things. It's just a case that they've never had these special like rules and quotas and things like that pushing them into various things, which has that is, I think, the main difference between now and then. And obviously there has been some historical biases and things like that. It's like a man being a nurse is seen as pretty is still seen as pretty weird, and a man, like a woman being I don't know, university professor or something, was probably seen the same way back then. But I'm pretty sure that we can find examples of women doing that in the same way we can find examples of female businesswomen, and so on. Local
I got a question though.
go on.
I got a question here, and I would like people to answer it. So, what do you guys think of the claim that most historians were men? I'd like to know the answer. I'd like to know what you guys think about it.
Well, my question would be, is it because women aren't interested in history, or is there actually a lot of female historians that aren't being mentioned there? You know, like, is it actually the case that most historians are men, or is that just historically the case? There's a lot of unanswered questions there. Are women interested in history? Are they getting involved with it? Or are they maybe moving into adjacent fields which are like history, but have maybe more of a social angle that they're more interested in? It's very hard to say if you know, that's actually the case. I mean, historically, most history writers who up until recently were probably male, but we can probably come up with examples to counter that. It's just I don't like to jump on the idea that history was a particular way. Like, I don't want to jump on the idea that most history writers were men, because there's a chance that that's not actually true, and that we're just talking about the most famous history writers or something like that. Or it might be the case, you know, it's just the case that we keep coming up with examples that counter this narrative that women didn't participate in society and didn't get jobs and things like that. So I'm very, very leery of jumping on this and saying it's true when it may not be. But I am open to it being true. Did you have any other questions?
I think it's more about what media influences society rather than which specific parts of society is men. Because even if most history people most history historians are men, you can still have them being very influenced by feminist type media that just like with the recent Stone Age person that was found. They was I think it was a male, but he was very lithe and of small build, so they called him non-binary because that's what they think they would have been. And that's just the very influence of current day media being trying to force a perspective. And just like they used to use male lovers, that they would find two men in one grave as like, oh, they were really good friends, or two women are written about in history that that they were living together. Oh no, they were just really good friends and that kind of stuff. So it's really a lot more about the societal bias than who writes down what happened, I would say. But yeah, we can learn that from history and historical documents. But you need the entire perspective, like you said.
Yeah, Sympathizer does bring up an interesting little article by Slate, which says 71.7% of historians were male. I'm not super sure why he's bringing this up, because it's not related to our topic. But that is an interesting thing to bear in mind when reading history. Though you do have to ask why that was, and I don't want to leap on the idea that it was because of bias, because that is the angle which is always leapt on when girls don't thrive at something or dominate something, but they never really say the reverse. Oh, Kathleen's asking who was talking about the liver question.
I have questions.
Carry on, Charles.
Oh, I was just wondering, what is the topic?
The topic was
a bit late. Sorry.
It's fine. The topic was: are we over medicating boys? Are we hampering their education with bad policies and things like that? And we've just been debating it. We had a neurologist on to give an unofficial opinion about it, and so on. Would you like to ask anything about that, or talk about your experiences with that, or anything?
Nothing of relevance, mate. Perhaps. My brother's been, or he used to be medicated from the age of about 3, because they decided to diagnose him. Well, sorry, that came out wrong. he was diagnosed with like ADHD and Asperger's, and I believe that they thought that it would hinder his ability to thrive in school if he didn't get something for that. So, over medication, definitely a thought that's crossed my mind before, but not in this particular context.
Do you think it's hindered him or helped him or anything like that? You know, what do you think the outcome is?
I mean, he didn't like it. It was clear that he got a bit tired, and so we stopped that, or my parents stopped that. So I have no idea how it would have turned out if he had, but I believe that he's much better without it. Sorry, weak opinion, I know.
It's fine. It's fine. We're interested in what everyone, any perspectives anyone can bring.
Well, I can talk about the Asperger's angle a bit. I've been diagnosed with Asperger's as well, and I've heard when they diagnosed me that the symptoms seem fairly similar to ADHD. So having your brother being diagnosed with both is kind of interesting, that they didn't really try to own in on if it was either or. But I mean, that might just be that they found him having ADHD related things, which might have been only Asperger's, and they just added that to it because they wanted to prescribe drugs to solve the issue, because there's no drugs that solve Asperger's generally. So it's more about social therapy and learning to understand social cues and stuff.
Yeah, no, that's true. Also, I believe that he's somehow outgrown the diagnosis of ADHD, and he's leaning very much into Asperger's right now. So that is also a fluid thing. Like, I honestly don't think that anyone should have tried to intervene, or because essentially the problem must have been that. Oh no, I'm sorry. Not used to talking to a bunch of people at the same time. The problem was primarily that the others, like the teachers in school, didn't feel like, oh, this is helpful for our class. So I'm still very angry about them trying to impede his growth by prescribing medicine that, well, didn't really do more good than harm, really. And people are different, like children's learning curves and the way that they behave and learn and act. It's just it goes in waves. They shouldn't have been so quick to ascribe a diagnosis on it and then treat it as if it was an illness.
Could you tell us a bit about how they did that? Like what the school started saying and things like that. Do you remember about that?
I was like 7, maybe. But I think it was primarily just like, well, we can't get him to sit still, we can't get him to be quiet, stuff like that.
Yeah, we have heard a couple of people say things like that to us about ADHD on the server generally, that it's, they can't sit still, they can't, like a lot of it is often stuff which sounds just like a young boy with lots of energy.
Yeah, God, yeah. No, a friend of mine actually got locked into a closet. Although that's maybe not relevant for this because he was a girl back then and only changed a few years back. So I don't know if that's relevant.
I'm not sure. I'd have to hear the story, but if you want to type it out,
yeah. No. I'm going to mute myself because I don't want to derail anything. But yeah, it's just thank you for bringing it up. It's interesting. I hadn't thought about this in a while.
Well, thank you for speaking about it. I am thinking of calling this a wrap soon and passing this over to a general chat if people want, which would end the live stream. Would people like to do that, or would they prefer to keep talking about the situation with boys in schools? We can talk more generally about some of the bad things that are being done to boys in schools, moving off of the medication topic, if people want to.
Well, just one thing that kind of occurred to me listening to everyone, and Kathleen, what you were saying about, your experiences in general, and everyone's experiences with having some kind of an intervention or another, in defense of intervening, for most of human history, there weren't very many effective interventions for anything, quote, wrong with someone. But the thing was, that people would at least make an attempt to kind of engineer the social structure and the culture around accommodating as many people as possible, so that the system was at least in some degree or another sort of built around accommodating everyone. And we came up with modern science and modern medicine and pharmacology and modern education. And like I said, that left the door open for people with ill intentions to move in and say, we've got all these brand new tools to intervene on the individual so that we can set up any kind of social and cultural structure we want and get them to conform to it. And, one thing that kind of comes to mind right away is how quickly the, individual person who doesn't end up conforming is suddenly ostracized and othered, by all of the rest of society, where, there was a time when that wasn't really so common, that you're not playing the game, and you're not conforming to this nice system that we have in place. So whatever's wrong, it must be wrong with you. So take your pills and shut up. Like I said, that's that is a cost of modern, technically and functionally advanced human culture, is that it leaves us vulnerable to being engineered as individuals in order to fit a status quo, rather than slowly over time engineering the status quo so that it fits as many of us as possible. And like I said, Kathleen or your partner talking about his various struggles with having to figure out when it's a good idea to intervene, with medications or whatever. I can think of situations like my own situation where, when I was a little kid, because I was traumatized so badly for so long that, looking back on it, I would have given my right arm for a pill to take to make me be okay. Sometimes good medication at any age, can correct a problem if it's really a problem. But if the system that kid is growing up into is already broken badly enough that not very many people fit into it, you can dope them up all day long if you want to, but eventually it's gonna come around and bite them in the butt. It's inevitable. It's not the doctor's fault, and it's not the kid's fault. If the system is broken, it's broken. And I'm 60 years old, and I don't remember any time in my past where, I've heard so much individual dissatisfaction with the status quo among people who historically, you know, were generally okay, or at least not completely miserable. You know, but now we are, and there's a reason for it. You know, we're not spoiled, and we're not over medicated, and we're not poorly adapted to modern life. Modern life is poorly adapted to us. You know, I mean, it's like I say, a lot of things depend on perspective. But if you get sick of it enough, and you step back, you just have to be honest with yourself and say, we're not doing very well, and there's a reason for it. You know, it's not because we're bad people, or we're, spoiled, or I don't know, just, rebellious for no reason, because the system is failing us, in huge ways, whether it's education or medicine or politics or economics. It's not doing very good. So anyway, that's all I got.
Thank you, Taz. And I'll just end by saying that my advice earlier about depression had an awful lot to do with getting back to how humans are meant to be. So going for walks, especially in the woods, getting to be around nature is something which really helps with depression. Community helps with depression. So going and joining one of the men's sheds helps a lot. Getting out of your house is a major thing, because your house can become an anchor that keeps you back, and it can stop you from going out and doing things you really want to. Keeping away from like mood and mind ordering medication, unless it's prescribed to you, is a good idea. And if it is prescribed to you, thinking about if it was prescribed to you before you were prescribed therapy, then it's probably a good idea to think about if you need the drug more than you need therapy. And yeah, just general stuff like that. Testosterone in men being low is something which has been linked to a lot of depression. I can't help with women, unfortunately, but it may be a similar thing with estrogen. That's about it, really. Unless anyone has any other thoughts, I'll let Darkisha take us out.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming to another Friday chat in the Men's Human Rights Discord. We are here usually every Friday. It's been an amazing conversation, and we hope to see you all next time. Goodbye.